We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order at 6:30. Nice to see everyone. Happy 2022. First up is our consent agenda. We have our prior minutes and a number of second policy readings. Any questions or discussion around the prior minutes or any of the policies? Lynn, I know I had one quick question. The policy F as in Frank 24 for the English learners. We're listed here that these are all second reads of the policies, but I was a little confused because it looked to me as though that was just an initial first read on that particular one. And that may be a neither here nor there. I don't know if that matters, but I just wanted to double check.
I can double check with Doreen and we can double check against the last meeting. Did you look at the last agenda to see if they were not there?
I didn't, Lynn.
I will take care of that. I'll look for that.
I mean, I think the thing that was confusing to me is that if you look on page 6 of the 9, there's no, I mean, on all the other ones, all the prior dates of an approval are listed, but those are all blank. And so that just confused me. Would it be a second reading if it hasn't passed a prior time, or at least it's not listed that I see here?
So this is a new, the reason it's not there is because it has not, I see what you're saying. This is a new policy for us, correct?
That's what I thought, and it's just listed on the agenda as a second read, but I feel as though it can't be a second read because we would have done the tentative approval the first go round.
I don't think Doreen updates that until it gets through its final approval, and then she puts both dates in it in order to be able to publish it online.
Okay, understood.
So look at the one before, those tentative approval and final approval dates, those are from 2019, that tobacco prohibition one. So you're looking at the previous approvals. Does anybody remember seeing that at the last meeting?
I pulled up the old agenda and it was on as a first read at the last meeting.
Okay, good. Well, that was the only clarification I wanted to make, that it was indeed a second reading on the policy. Okay, anyone else have any questions or comments then?
And you do have Miranda on now.
Oh, super. Thank you, Morgan. So I just need a motion to accept prior minutes and the policies.
I can make that motion.
Thanks, Erin. By roll, Miranda,
Yes.
Emily,
Yes.
Lisa,
Yes.
Erin,
Yes.
Kat,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Arlene,
Yes.
and Mary is a yes. Does anyone have a need to reprioritize the flow of the agenda tonight?
I do not, Mary.
Okay. Morgan, still no one in the public service space for who would like to be recognized?
I don't see anybody there and no new entrants onto the Zoom.
Okay, super. All right, well, that brings us to the kind of bulk of our meeting tonight, which is stars Morgan Daybell going over our budget.
Thanks for having me. So in terms of the not budget part of my report, that's primarily informational. We still have not seen a draft of the audit yet. Hoping that that'll be soon. In terms of the calendar for budget development, just wanted to remind folks that the petitions for school board seats are due by January 24th. They would go to Emily Fecto, who's the Berkshire Town Clerk, as well as the District Clerk. And if it's easier for you to send them to me, I can get them to her, although you should probably get them to me by that Thursday or Friday before. I did receive a petition from Aaron so far, and I've sent that off. And you've got 3 more weeks. Just wanted to make sure that that's on everyone's radar. And the 3 seats that are up are Aaron's, Mary's, and Arlene's. So any questions on that?
Mine is forthcoming, Morgan.
Perfect. Okay, and I'm happy to answer any questions or try to answer any questions on the regular monthly report offline if that's easier for folks. But we'll get into the FY23 budget. In your packet under my report, I showed you the 4 motions that we are going to need before we can warn a budget. I'll kind of talk big picture on them before we get into the nuts and bolts of the latest draft of the budget. One thing I wanted to put out there is that even if we do not decide to warn a budget at tonight's meeting, I will still want those 2 motions to announce tuition rates before we adjourn. Those are due to the state by the 15th, whether we have a budget set or not. For your district, because you really don't accept tuition kids, it's largely just a pro forma step, but we may as well get the easy ones done and right. So I'll definitely be asking for those at the end of my section. I did include in your packet similar attachments to your first meeting, and I will start screen sharing and going over those. I kind of first wanted to tip you to some of the big unknowns that are still out there. There are a few, I would say, relatively manageable ones. The first one being equalized pupil numbers. We've got a number that's been shared with us. I do think that those are going to drift a few numbers either upward or downward from what I'm hearing of the AOE. They send out a first draft, and then there are districts and SUs across the state that tell them that they've got their numbers wrong, and then the data folks in those SUs will send corrected information, and that has a ripple effect through the rest of the state. So those will change. Normally, those don't change by more than a few, but it doesn't take too much for a couple of kids to materially change the tax rates. The yield rate will not change between now and when the legislature actually sets their figure. The other big moving part, and the SU board members have already been tipped to this, is around special ed revenue and how we're funding special ed next year. I'll kind of quickly go over how we're funding it this year, the current year that we're in. And the way that works is that there are special ed expenses both at the supervisory union level and at the district level. At the supervisory union level, we get some money in a block grant to cover that. And as part of that, we have to take some of those expenses off the top and make sure that they're a local, and that's at a 60%, 40% share. Anything that's left over after that that we spend, or that we spend at the district level that's an eligible expense, we get a certain percentage of that money back from the state. It runs around 56%, and we don't ever know what the final percent is until that year is done. And so kind of overall, that's how it's done. Under Act 173, which is scheduled to go live on July 1st, so the beginning of this budget, we at the SU level would get a significantly larger block grant from the state. The districts would not see any money at the district level, and then any money that we spend over that block grant becomes a local cost. So those conversations that we had 5 and 10 years ago at the district level about how principal comes and say that they need a paraeducator for a special ed kid, the conversation would always be like, well, you know, it's going to cost us $30,000, but we're going to get 15,000 back from the state. Now there's a certain point where any special ed expenses that you add are just going to be added to your local revenue. The way that you should feel that in the budget is that you're going to see a loss at the district level of that state revenue, but you're going to see a smaller assessment from the supervisor union. We've put forth the budget assuming that that is going to go forward. What we are hearing from some legislators who are connected enough to know is that it's likely that they're going to kick the can down the road for another year on implementing the funding piece of this. There are a lot of districts who are facing a drop in their special ed revenue who are making noise about that. And there's a lot of, I think, just general unpreparedness, both from some districts and from the agency on being ready to go live with that. And Lynn, I don't know if you want to weigh in any more on that kind of big picture side of it.
Yeah, I think that, you know, we've talked about 173, especially at the SU level, pretty significantly in terms of the intention behind that is around making it so that students across Vermont have more equitable opportunities, no matter what their zip code is. So I think that's really the intention behind it. So I think that it's going to, when it shifts, it's going to have a negative impact on some of the higher spending communities. And so that's what Morgan is talking about, is that a lot of that pushback is going to come there because they're going to be so negatively impacted. But the reality is there's a lot of systems work that goes beyond, that needs to happen in terms of our readiness to make this shift. And we've been working on this for 4 years. All the work that we've been talking about around our MTSS work and all of the other system and structure work we've been doing has been tied to 173 in this shift. So others aren't quite there, like Morgan said. So I think there's a lot of political will to delay, and it makes it very complicated because we're building a budget anticipating that. And I think we've had an internal conversation about how it would be the wrong move to not present a budget anticipating that, because we have no way of predicting whether or not they actually will delay or not. And we'll have to warn this before we know. So that's what's made this a little tricky.
Yeah. So overall, if we move forward warning it with Act 173, assuming that's implemented, it's a smaller assessment from the SU, but it's less revenue overall. If we do that and the implementation is delayed, it likely means that at the SU, we're going to be short some significant revenue, and we will have to talk to the districts about increasing the assessment over what we warn, but the districts are going to see that reimbursement money coming into them. So it should be a wash at the district level. It might even be a little bit better in the short term. If we were to warn the old way, we would be giving you a bigger assessment from the SU, and you would be banking on some revenue at the local level that you might not receive. So if we did it the old way and we found that was the wrong guess, it would likely mean that the SU would see more revenue coming in, and we might just not assess you the last month or two of special ed, but you would not see any of that revenue in the district, and it's hard to predict how badly damaged you would be in terms of your budgets at that level. So that's, I think, a lot of maybe uninteresting background, but it's kind of the justification for why we are going forward and why you're seeing less revenue, but smaller assessments from the SU. If I thought that there was going to be any resolution on that in the next 2 weeks, I might be here saying, recommending strongly that you punt warning a budget, but I I don't see the legislature moving quickly on that. That's a pretty significant bill to tackle. So other than that, the other pieces that are still potentially moving, I think we have a pretty good handle on how many tuition kids we should be budgeting for. Districts will start announcing their tuition rates in the next few weeks, and so we could maybe tweak those numbers a little bit, but they could move up or they could move down from my prediction, and I don't think that would be a real material movement. Certainly less of an impact than if we guess the number of kids who are coming for tuition wrong. So those are the big unknowns. If there are any questions on that, I'll take them. Otherwise, I'll kind of walk you through the big picture of how we're presenting the budget and what I see as the movements. And if you want to go into a line by line, digging into details, we can certainly do that, or we can just focus on the staff and some of the tuition kit assumptions. So I believe up on your screen now is the January 5th draft of the budget that we put in the book. I don't know, thumbs up from anyone on that, if that's what you see. A lot of red cells. Perfect, thank you. So this is similar to what you saw last month. We've been tweaking the lines primarily around staffing and then tuition. So this line here under K-12 is where your high school tuition and tech center tuition come in. Still down a little bit, but probably higher than the budget you saw last month. You will see the direct instruction is up a significant amount. Part of that would be around teacher salaries, and part of that is around some of the increase in FTEs that we've talked about. But a big chunk of that is the special ed money disappearing from a special ed line, because under Act 173, there is no special ed cost at the district level. So we're moving that up into the regular ed budget. That kind of brings you down to a budget that's at 18.2 million right now, or up 428,000 over the prior year. In terms of budget to budget, that's a 2.4% increase on the expense side, which is, I think, in line with what we see from year to year. What you haven't really seen yet are the revenues and the tax rates. First stop on the revenue is, you'll see this big decrease for special ed revenue not coming in at the district level. And then this is a bit of a fluid number right now. That 150,000 is for Medicaid reimbursement money, which we're also exploring moving to the SU and reducing the assessment going out to you. And so we've done that. The state revenue that you still see here under FY23 proposed is the 2 small schools grants or merger support grants for Bakersfield and for Montgomery. This is the amount that we've gotten this year for FY22. Nobody at the state has been able to give us a projection for next year, given where enrollment numbers are one year to the next. My hope is it's not going to move much, and I couldn't predict whether it's going to move up or down. So I think that's as solid a number as we're going to have. We'll swing back to this number, the use of fund balance, after I go through the tax rates. But this is the amount of money that you had left over at the end of FY21 that either goes back to your taxpayers as a revenue, and so a tax reduction for FY23, or you can ask them to vote on using it for another specified purpose. And this is where in years past, at least at the district levels, when we've had that surplus, we've gone to the voters and say, we'd like to put 50,000, 100,000, $500,000 away into a capital reserve fund which we can use for the repair and upgrade, potentially purchase of buildings in the future. In FY22, we had a fund balance surplus of 403,000 and change. And at that time, we put the full amount into buying down the tax rate. This year, we've got a fund balance of $1.2 million, largely because of all those kids not showing up at high schools, whether it was that we over budgeted or the drop of kids that we saw because of COVID. So a significant amount of money that we can take to the voters in some mix of fund balance to buy down the tax rate or socking money away for the repair and maintenance of buildings. So I'm going to come back to that. I just want to plant that seed, and then the number I have in here is just a placeholder for 500,000, so I can make sure that all the formulas work.
Morgan, can you repeat the figure? You said a 1.2 million surplus?
1.2 million.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Can I just
So-
say something, Morgan, before we go? I want to plant the seed, and I know you know the seed I'm going to plant. I know there's a temptation around buying down tax rate when you're in circumstances like this. My Wi-Fi kicked out for a moment, so did you already say this?
Not yet.
Okay. Do you want me to say it now or no?
You can certainly say it now. Yep. I
Okay.
can't hear it enough.
So there is a temptation and a trap associated with taking a big amount of money and buying down a tax rate, because if you find yourself in the following year without the same extra amount of revenue, you're going to essentially be starting that next budget round with what feels like that level of deficit to make up in your tax rate. So it just puts you a little bit in the hole, because you're not only going to have the amount from your budget for that following year, you're going to have that amount that you applied to the revenue, which is going to feel like a much bigger increase to the community, if that makes sense.
And to kind of put that in real numbers, so if you see this 482 here, that was the amount of leftover money that we had in FY21. In FY22, we put the full amount, which was at 403. So that was a decline of $80,000. And you could argue that the decline is because we budgeted a little bit closer to where reality ended up. We didn't have as much money left over. If that had gone down to zero, so if in FY22, we had totally nailed our projections and we had exactly, FY20, if we had exactly as much money as we had needed, this number, this 403 number would have been a zero. And that's, saying we did a great job budgeting, but that would have driven up your taxes probably by about 3 pennies that year. So there's sort of a disincentive for this number to move one way or another from year to year, even if it means you're doing a better job of bringing forward more accurate budgets. And I can certainly, we can play with this $500,000 number, once we get into the tax rates and say, okay, if we put in more, what's it going to do to this year's tax rate? And just know that whatever it does to this year's tax rate potentially would have the opposite effect going into FY24. So this is the projected tax rates section based on the budgets that I had sent to you earlier this afternoon. Again, the overall budget, so the amount of money that you're giving your principals to spend is this $18.2 million figure. The local and grant revenue is everything that we don't get from the state as part of that ed fund payment in order to help pay for this budget. What's left is the education spending. And so this is the figure that you and the voters control by those assumptions you make both on the spending side and revenue side. And this is really the only part of that formula that you control. So that $17 million is up 785,000 over last year. That number is divided by equalized pupils, which as of today was down about 8 kids. It may drift down a few more kids. It could drift up as well, not sure yet. The education spending divided by the equalized pupils is your per pupil ed spending, and that's the 16,469. That's the number that we put on your warning. So that's the number that the voters see. And that's also the number that we tend to use when we're comparing NMV to other districts in the state. So, you know, in the flyer that we'll talk about, most of you recognize this graph, which shows the statewide spending. That's what kind of drives this, this number here going into future years. We take that education spending and we divide it by the dollar yield. And this is the yield that will be set by the legislature as they're on their way out the door in May or June. So we won't have a firmer number for this yet. I think I'd put this out to you in the email when the number dropped. Vermont statute sort of defines how this number is determined, and the tax commissioner has to propose that number on December 1st. The number that he's required to propose was pretty significantly higher than this because of a surplus in the ed fund. There, I think, is nobody who thinks that number is going to survive. And so this was a number that that the agency put out as where they think it's going to land, assuming that the legislature pulls some of that money out of the ed fund off the top to use for other priorities. As far as I know, everybody across the state and other SUs is using this number, so I think it's the one to go with. But you know, it's unlikely that that's exactly where it's going to end up at the end of the year. So that equalized spending divided by the dollar yield gives you the equalized residential school tax rate. So this is the way you can compare tax rates to other towns before you apply the CLA, which is really a local factor. So primarily because of that yield drop, the residential school tax rate with the budget as presented right now is down almost 10 cents, which is you know, pretty significant happy dance time for all of us. We then divide that by the CLA for each town, and those CLA figures are dropping in every town, basically because sales are picking up and the cost of those sales, you know, properties are going for more than they are listed on the grand list. So falling CLA pushes up tax rates for everyone because what they're recognizing is that the properties that are assessed townwide are probably assessed too low. At least that's what the state thinks. And so they're basically adding property value to each of your towns. And this is the mechanism that they do it. Each of those is a different rate for each town. And so you end up with different rates that are applied on each town's tax rates. You still, however, are seeing you know, a range of a drop of less than a penny in Berkshire, and they're the ones that saw the biggest drop in their CLA to a drop of about 7 cents in Sheldon, and they've got the smallest change to their CLA. So their grand list going into this year was as the most accurate of the 4 towns according to the state. I can never remember who's kind of been through this dog and pony show with the tax rate. So maybe I'll pause it there and ask if there are any questions on how that tax rate is calculated. And then we can talk about how you can change it. And, you know, eventually we can get into the details of the expense side of the budget, but we should have a conversation around the meeting structure before we talk about whether you want to warn a budget tonight or not. So any questions on the tax rate or how that's calculated?
So for each town, like for example, Bakersfield, the proposed at 1.434, like that is what actually will read on their tax bill potentially.
Correct.
So everybody is going down.
Everybody is going down, assuming that, yeah, the yield stays the same and equalized people stays the same.
And then the proposed 500,000, to bring the budget down, so that leaves 700,000 that we'd be putting into the reserve fund, is that right?
Yeah, if that's the numbers that you decide on, exactly.
And once you put it into a reserve fund, like this year, if that's what we did, and then next year we had nothing and we needed to buy it down, can you then use that reserve, or once it's in, is it in?
So once it's in, it stays there for the purpose that it's voted on. I
Okay,
believe that you could go back to the voters and say, we got, killed on tuition this year. We want to pull some of that out of capital reserve and use it to pay down the tax rate for that year. You would have to get voter approval for that. And my philosophy, I think, would be to do whatever you could to weather that storm to leave that money in there,
Yeah.
because we know that eventually we're going to use that. And it may just be
Yeah.
that you put money in on these good years, and then when you're coming in closer to the bone, you say, okay, we're not going to put any money in the capital reserve that year.
okay, thank you.
Morgan, when was the last time we had to use money from that account, that fund?
I believe that we dipped into it a little bit last year in Berkshire. When we had the Act 46 marriage, the three Franklin Northeast original towns, Bakersfield, Berkshire, Montgomery, each had a capital reserve fund that came with them. Those funds are tied to those old districts, so we can only use them in the towns that they came from. And so this one would go into a district-wide one. So if, say, and I think Berkshire's was probably the biggest of all of them. If, we finally deal with the paving in Bakersfield and that capital reserve fund goes down to zero, and then the boilers go, they would not be able to use it until we've established this district-wide one.
So there's nothing in the district-wide one now, or is there that 403? I'm a little bit confused.
The 403 was not capital reserve. That was the leftover money we gave back to the voters.
Okay,
There
sorry.
was zero in the capital reserve. So yeah,
You're right.
nothing in a district-wide one yet.
Thanks, I misread
Yep.
that. Thank you.
I feel like I'm just missing something, because this all just looks really good. Like if tax rates are going down for everybody and we're going to be putting 700,000 into the capital reserve from zero, I mean, isn't it kind of win-win across the board? Or is there more to come? Am I missing like something else?
Well, right. There's always more to come. The way that this is presented, yeah, there's in a normal year, we would be ecstatic about bringing this to the voters. I
There's
think that,
uncertainty.
yeah,
Sorry.
the big uncertainties around special ed for me. But once you've warned a budget, if things go south, we're gonna try our hardest to stay within this budget and, sort it out next year. The tax rate piece that Lynn was tipping, I'll just kind of walk through this again with folks. So you'll see on your screen, which is static, you've got this 500,000 figure there, and that would be roughly 700,000 going into a capital reserve fund. If you say, you know what, we want this to be even better, and we want you to make the use of fund balance 700,000, and we're only going to put 500,000 in a capital reserve, you would buy down your tax rate, when it comes in at this point here, this 1.27 would go down probably another penny and a half. And that would ripple through to your local towns. The risk that you have is that when this previous year number next year is 700,000, and we come back to the voters and we only have 500,000 left overall, we say we're going to put the full 500,000 in, but you've already baked in a penny and a half tax increase. And so that's the risk of putting too much into that fund balance. And that's really, my gut tells me that it's primarily tuitioning towns in the state that have this problem, because, as you all know, as you look over those tuition bills, Sure, we know we've got, call it 50 eighth graders going to high school somewhere, but 10 of them we might find have parents in Enosburg, and all the kids went to Enosburg, and so they're no longer your students for tuition bills, even though they were your students for pre-K and education. Or families move in that you didn't know about, and you've got 10 tuition bills that are gone out of district or out of state that you don't know the families at all, but you're paying for those kids for the next 4 years.
Do you think it makes sense then to consider even like reducing that use of fund balance so that we're not going higher, but keeping it more in line with where it's been even like a year ago, like 400,000, so then putting 800,000 into the reserve? I mean, how much would that impact tax rates? Like if we're already going down, it just seems like it's a good time to do that and be prudent and conservative, but I don't know, maybe that's.
Yeah, so it's roughly, if you change your revenue or your expenses by $138,000, that changes your tax rate by a penny. So kind of keep that in mind. So if you went back down to the 403 figure, or called it 400 or 410, to make it match that FY22 number, it would bring your tax rate up less than a penny. What it might do is it might push Berkshire after the CLA into positive territory. I don't know if it's worth it doing that.
I just don't like the idea of it going up and the whole trap that you talk about. Like, it is a trap. So,
right.
And as you just creep up more and more, then you're always like kind of just, hedging and playing this game.
Exactly. I would be really panicked if there was a majority of the board that wanted to put the full 1.2 in there as fund balance, because then I would know that you've got a 10-cent tax increase coming the following year. I mean, it really needs to be where you guys are comfortable with. I think in the 500 to 700 range on either side is kind of a reasonable place to be. You certainly wouldn't want to go down below the 403 that you had going into this year, given that you have it. If you start getting up to 750,000 in terms of the use of fund balance, then I get worried about future years.
So Morgan, the $700,000 number was just a number you arbitrarily picked to discuss. Is that correct?
Exactly. I basically kind of picked the 500,000 and threw it in there because it was more than 403 and it was a round number. There's really no science behind it other than that. You could just as easily say, you're not tying your hands for future years, but you could say, we're going to ask the voters to put $500,000 into the capital reserve because that's a round number, and we're going to ask them for $500,000 every year as long as we have that much. And going forward, I think that would also be okay. That's a lot of money going back in this budget, but it's still a reasonable investment in your capital reserve fund. And I think that long term is really what's most important with these buildings that are all 20, 30, 40 years old.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's important to build a capital reserve fund, particularly one that every school in the district can use. And it also is equally important to give back to the taxpayers, because I think traditionally that's what they expect when we have a surplus, and we want to be mindful of that. That we essentially, by keeping that money, are using their money without giving them interest. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have to be mindful, to return a good portion back to the taxpayers.
I think it helps, and it's not easy to communicate about because this whole funding system is complex, but I think it's helpful to help them see too that if we did fund that too heavily in what we give back to the taxpayers, that it's going to actually, like Morgan said, 10 cents before you even start. It's going to be 10 cents, and then you have to build in what you're naturally going to increase in terms of, your salary growth for your personnel as well. So you're going to start your budgeting in the hole by 10 plus however many cents on your tax rate. So that what that could result in is a temptation to reduce programming in our budgeting process. So it just has to be something that we go in eyes wide open, and we're good about communicating about that with our community. If we go too high, they just need to know in advance that could happen the following year.
And is this our third year as NMV, or third budget?
That's a great question. So it was 2019, July 19 that we merged plan?
Or
Yeah,
at least like what you're showing on this spreadsheet, like this or next year's proposed, and then the 2 prior years.
Yeah, these are all NMV.
Because I just still think the fact that we have nothing in capital reserve and put nothing in, correct, since we started NMV, I
Mhm.
think is also, I mean, I'm seeing what Lisa's saying for sure, but also thinking like, we've put nothing in it the last 2 years, so it feels good if we can put a lot in it.
Yeah. So let me pivot and show you the warning if I can, and that will maybe feed into this conversation as well.
I think this is your 4th budget together. Your 3rd year, but your 4th budget.
I agree, Lynn.
The first year was kind of, we budgeted separately and mushed them together though.
True.
But yeah,
Officially.
officially. So can you see the warning up on your screen now? Yep.
Yeah.
And you do have this in your packet as well. So I'm going to skip the top part. Article 4, this is the money article that you're going to be going to the voters, and those numbers in yellow are last year. So right now is the budget that is presented. This expend number would be that 18.2 million. Estimated per pupil would be 16,469. And that number here would be 5.53. And again, that's because your budget is increasing and your revenue is decreasing. And the reason that your tax rates are going down is because of that really healthy yield number. So this number, I know on the other side tends to wig out board members when it goes over 5%. So I'll just kind of plant that seed there. If you go back to that FY23 budget and you look at that fund balance figure again, and you say to me, you know what, we're just gonna split the difference. We're gonna put half in capital reserve and half back to the voters. That is enough to drive that percentage down so that this number here is actually 4.90. I don't know if that worries folks. A lot of this seems to be a little bit foolish to me, but I know that, it's kind of like turning the odometer over in your car. It's not any older really, but it feels a lot older when all those 9999s go away. So I just wanted to kind of plant that seed there. The other issue that I want to tie you to, and we'll come back to this, this Article 5, you would need this year, and this is asking the voters for that leftover money from June 30th and giving you permission to take some of that out and put it into the capital reserve fund. If they vote this down and they pass the budget, what it means is that I'm going to change that use of fund balance figure when I send your budget to the state. you're still going to get to spend the 18.2 million, but your tax rates for that year are going to fall through the floor. What Enosburg Richford did last year was pass this article. And so this is kind of the same thing, but it looks forward to a future year. So what this is doing is it's asking your voters for the authority to make that decision on whatever's left over at the end of FY22. So whatever money you have in the bank in 6 months from now, instead of bringing it to the voters a year from March, you guys would get to tell me, if it was the same number, you get to tell me, yeah, put 600,000 in the capital reserve and then 600,000 in the buying down the tax rates and go forward with that budget. And you don't have to wait for any further action from the voters. Enosburg Richford Board specifically wanted that in there and wanted that ability. They ended this year sort of coming in pretty close to zero. So they don't really have a lot of discretion to use that. Last year, you guys decided not to put this article forward. And maybe the board members remember the discussion around that. I don't, but it's sort of around where you want that authority to lie. So we could put that article in, and then this discussion would be a little bit different next year, or we could leave it out and just plan on going back to the voters for permission each year. So I wanted to kind of plunk that onto your radar, and then we will go back to the budget.
Morgan, why wouldn't we have to have that warning in every year, that article, if we're going to
You would
add?
have to put it in every year, but what you're saying is instead of, can we please spend last year's money this way? You're saying if there's money left over next year, can we have the authority to put some of it in capital reserve? So you're still asking the voters every year. It's just you're asking them a year in advance rather than for last year's money. And my belief, and we'd run it by the lawyers, is you could put it in this year, and if the voters tell you to pound sand, they don't want to give you that authority. It doesn't mean that next year you couldn't go forward and say, okay, we have $250,000 left over this year. We want to put 100,000 in capital reserve or whatever the numbers are. So that's a pretty big decision point. And again, we can tweak the detail of the budget if we want to, but this call on the fund balance, if we warn tonight, is probably more significant than anything we're going to touch on the expense side, unless we're going to start digging into cutting people in programs. And I tipped this in an email to you. The other reason I keep saying if we warn a budget tonight is that the legislature, as I mentioned in email, is fast tracking a bill that would give you, the school board, and give select boards the authority to vote everything by Australian ballot again this March, and hold your informational meeting virtually rather than having an in-person meeting. So that would be the same way that we held the meetings last March. They do plan to follow up with another bill that would give you the authority to do it for your regular meetings like this. So you wouldn't have to have Courtney parked at the emergency services building to meet the requirement of that in-person location. My gut tells me they will only give you that until the summer, when hopefully things are a little bit better, or you could at least be holding meetings outside in a tent if case transmission is still high. That bill should pass at the end of next week. So you could certainly go ahead and have the conversation tonight and say, if you say, we don't think they're going to give us that authority, we're going to warn a traditional town meeting. And if they give us the authority, we'll warn a quickie emergency meeting and rewarn it. Or we're going to warn a virtual town meeting and hope that we get that authority. And if we don't, we'll hold a quickie meeting and rewarn it. Or you can say, we'll talk about the budget. You tell me what you want for a fund balance next week. And we'll go and we'll warn something at the end of that or the beginning of the week of the 17th. We do start bumping up into warning deadlines, which is why they're pushing this bill so quickly through the legislature. So if we need to change it, we really probably need to do it by the 17th or 18th of January. So sorry for all of those unknowns, but that is life as we know it these days.
Morgan, have you, or Lynn, do you have a sense of what other districts are choosing to do as far as how they're holding their annual meetings?
I think this just came, we were anticipating they would take this on. I think the speed in which this is going through the legislature. I wasn't aware that it would go that quickly, so I have not had the opportunity to talk to my colleagues yet. I will tomorrow to get a sense of what they're thinking.
Yeah.
My gut tells me it'll probably be that they'll want to hold the annual meetings the way they were held last year, given the number of I've been on with them throughout the week, not about this, but just about the virus right now and the issues that they're having. So my gut is that's what they'll prefer to do. Morgan, have you heard?
I haven't heard. I'll say that I caught wind that this was happening from my select board chair and went on the calendar and saw that the Senate Gov Ops Committee had a bill, and they probably spent 20 minutes on it in committee and pushed it out. And as soon as they voted on it is when I sent you that email. So the Senate probably voted on it on the floor today. I'm not sure, but it was really, I don't think it was on many people's radar until probably until it goes over to the House and people start tuning into it.
Morgan, it did pass out of the Senate today.
Okay.
And the House GovOps Committee had a hearing on it this afternoon. I just reached out to a colleague to see if I could get a sense of how it went this afternoon, but I haven't heard back yet. I do know, in answer to the question that was asked about other districts, there are definitely some towns, not school districts, but towns who are talking about having a traditional town meeting this year. I believe Franklin has already decided that they were going to have a traditional town meeting.
So Morgan, I mean, I know we still have a lot to go through budget wise. When do you feel we want to kind of segue to the discussion as far as the format of the meeting? Should we go through the rest of the budget? I mean, and we have a lot of kind of, we have to hammer out the fund balance, money, the capital reserve, what we're going to give back to taxpayers. And then we have this other discussion around the format for the meeting. I just want to kind of, when does it make sense to kind of have those conversations?
I would say that that's entirely up to the 8 of you. We can certainly go into the budget detail in whatever level you want. We can hit the highlights. If you want to start with the format, I'm good with that as well.
Okay.
I'm just wondering if it's premature to decide upon the format because it hasn't been passed into law. So I mean, I think we could talk about preference, but right now we don't have the option legally to do it remotely unless this bill passes.
Okay. So then, Lynn, what I'm hearing from you and from Morgan is that if this bill passes and we want to revisit the format in which we hold the meeting, we'll need to call an emergency meeting to make that decision. But if we're going then that means that we are warning this tonight, potentially, if the numbers feel copacetic with everyone and we land in a good place, we're going to warn this and warn it in the context of an in-person annual meeting.
Morgan, is that what we have not had an opportunity to connect in 2 days, so I don't know if your thinking changed on that or not.
So you do not have the bill has not passed yet, and so that option is not available to you. My gut tells me that if the 8 of you say we are definitely doing a virtual meeting, and you want to warn it that way tonight, I would check in with your legal counsel, and if he says you can't do it until you have the authority, then we would call a quickie meeting and rewarn that. If he says you are allowed to do it, would probably just have you in February reaffirm that decision to make it clear that that's what you want to do, because you did act before the authority. But I think you can move forward tonight knowing that you will have that option. And so maybe having that conversation first. And if you guys all decide, you know what, we're going to have an in-person meeting, we think it's time, we don't have to worry about how that law progresses. And if you guys decide we want to have a virtual meeting, if it's an option, you know, we can make the call then about whether you want to just schedule a 10-minute meeting. We will drill down the numbers so we know what the numbers are going to be, you know, pending any revenue changes that might change some of the things that I talked about before. I'm okay with either, but I think it's ripe to have the discussion now about, or to have the discussion this evening about whether you want to do this in person or virtually.
I vote for virtual.
Vote for virtual as well.
Can we not do it the way we do these meetings, regardless of the bill, having it virtual, but having the public service building open as an option? Or do we have to wait for the bill because it falls under like a different umbrella?
So it's a little bit different from these meetings, and I'll say right up front, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm happy to skate out on the thin ice of interpreting the law. But your meetings, your board meetings, you can have your representation virtually, and you can have a space, physical space with one person there to fulfill the need to have a physical location, which is part of statute. For an annual meeting, you've potentially got ballot votes from the floor. So if 2 people are running for moderator and 7 people want a ballot vote, then you have to do a ballot vote. And there's really no legal way to do it if you have residents who are zooming in and residents who are physically present. So I think if you have a traditional meeting, the only people who will be allowed to vote are the people who physically show up. You could certainly offer it up, you know, for people to view it by Zoom. But in terms of participation, I think if it's in person, only the people who are in person get to vote. Does that answer your question?
I feel a little uncertain about preemptively deciding in advance of a legislative any kind of legislative go ahead to have the meeting virtually, because as the statute stands right now, we're obligated by law to have an in-person meeting. That's not necessarily my preference, but personally, but
My intent in saying, sorry, Mary, but can I just say my intent in saying I vote for virtually was just to try to get feedback from everybody else. Because if we all wanted it virtual and then the bill does pass, couldn't we establish tonight, and sorry if Morgan already said this, but that if the bill passes, we can go ahead with the virtual so we wouldn't have to meet again?
I think we would check with the lawyer to see if you needed to revisit that in a special meeting.
But if it's the will of this body to do to do it virtually, we could also just plan on the 5-minute meeting, and then we have the actual budget discussion tonight. And you tell me what you want for fund balance and any tweaks that we want to the budget. And so when we meet again in 2 weeks or after the bill is done, you're really just spending 5 minutes saying, yep, those are the numbers we said. Yep, approve the warning and move on. I would certainly be comfortable with that. And then if only 2 of you want to have a virtual meeting and everyone else is saying that they want to have it in person, then I think we can go ahead and warn it as an in-person meeting tonight and not bother to schedule a second meeting unless you want to for any other reasons.
Any other thoughts, folks, about how to proceed here? Do people want to wait until we actually have the authority to make the decision to do this virtually? See what the legislature says in the next day or so?
I prefer that option.
I agree.
I'm
Anyone?
good with however everybody else wants to make a decision, because for me, I'm going to be in meetings regardless. So one more isn't going to be any different than a normal day.
So Morgan, it sounds as though, well, and please correct me, anyone, if I'm misinterpreting, that we would prefer to wait for the legislature to make a final decision as to whether we even have that authority to warn the meeting as a virtual meeting.
That is what I'm hearing. And so I think we want to have that meeting in the books before we leave tonight. And let's see here. Sorry if you're now looking at your agenda.
And Morgan, that slight delay, how do, as far as numbers go, that gives you the potential that you would have some of those special ed figures more locked in at that point as well, or not likely?
I would say it's not likely, because that's really going to be legislative action on whether or not they're going to pretty radically change Act 173, at least the implementation of it. So I don't think that's going to come out of there quickly. There may be a few other numbers that could cause some small tweaks in the SU assessment, like transportation revenue is one that's usually a pretty good chunk of change, and I'm making some guesses on that because they haven't released numbers. But I wouldn't punt the meeting for that reason. But you might help.
Okay, so and when would the latest you said was January 17th that we need to meet prior to the 17th?
I would say the 17th is the latest that you want to do it, and hopefully the bill will be signed into law by then. If it went out of the House today, I mean, it should be at the governor's desk, I would think, by Tuesday or Wednesday, unless the House has changed it.
It passed out of the Senate. It's still in the House.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you won't be taking it up tomorrow.
Correct. It's still in the committee of jurisdiction, as far as I know, which is House Government Ops now.
Right. And so in theory, you could do all 3 readings on Tuesday, but that still doesn't get it to the governor until Wednesday.
Yeah, and then the governor has 5 days to sign. And also if there are any changes coming out of the House, it has to go back to the Senate.
Right, that's my worry.
Yeah,
It's locked in enough that they don't need to do that. I will say that they are aware of the town meeting day warning deadlines. And so I think we warn a meeting for the 17th. We may, if you just talk on the 17th to do a virtual meeting, we may have a few extra days to warn it because you're not locked into those February 16th. I think yours is February 16th or 15th annual meeting date, because that's the meeting that's moving to Australian ballot. So you might buy an extra week. We'd have to run that by the lawyer. But I think if your intention is to punt the decision, let's plan on January 17th for, a half an hour meeting.
Great, let's do that.
And just pointing out that's Martin Luther King Day, is that right?
that's correct. And I may not be available at 6:30.
So
I
my
don't think
hope is that at the end of tonight, we will have a budget that you all 8 of you are comfortable with. And the only thing we will need to do at that meeting is actually approve the warning. So, let's talk about the budget if that's where you want to go next, or talk about the fund balance if that's where you want to go next, or talk about that additional fund balance article. But if we can get kind of a decision on those 3 things tonight, the meeting on Monday should be pretty pro forma. And as soon as we get 5 people on a call, we can bang through it.
Okay, so Morgan, then, yeah, why don't we pivot then to the fund balance discussion and hash that out and then move forward, since it does somewhat inform the, tax rate and some numbers depending on where we land with that breakdown.
Sure. So this $500,000 that's on your screen is what this current draft proposes to go back to taxpayers, and that would put 710-ish thousand into a capital reserve fund. Those numbers I can tweak either up or down. And again, right now, the numbers on the article of the warning would be a 5.53% increase to your ed spending per pupil. So that's an increase over the prior year.
What did you have to increase that number to get that down to like 4.9?
It's about $90,000. So what I kicked in there, the other number I gave you was just saying, okay, if we put 605,000 in place of that $500,000, so we're going to say we'll give half the fund balance back to buy down taxes and half to capital reserve. That brings that percentage down to 4.90 if we don't change anything else in the budget. And then that 4.90 is it's an increase over the prior year, but it's a smaller increase than we had the year before.
And going over 5, you're saying has concerns or raises concerns.
It is definitely a target that the other board, that a few members on the other board have looked at. And they tend to look at, we don't want that number to go over 5%. We don't want this number here to go over 3%. And so we played the game of cutting budgets to that number. I think historically, you guys haven't really looked at it that way.
I think it's an
I feel like we
arbitrary.
have.
It's a little bit arbitrary, Kat. That it's. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to look at it getting under 5, but I do think it's a board preference, like Morgan said, for a couple of members on the other side.
I feel like we have looked at that before though, and that it was kind of like this magic number. And I agree. I mean, it's arbitrary, but it is somewhat, I think, psychological for people. Like you hear a number and then it kind of, yeah, like it's just a trigger for people. So, but maybe not, but I like it as is or going, I mean, I think it sounds better to go with the 605 or whatever you worked out to get it under 5%. I mean, that would probably be my vote.
Catherine, I think I agree with that. I think it, when we have such a large surplus to then also show an increase in the budget, it just doesn't feel right for me. I feel like we should put a little bit more back to the taxpayers.
I think it also gives the taxpayers the feeling that we're trying to work with them, that half is going into that reserve and half is going back.
All right, well, that sounds, I mean, that sounds fine for me. I too am always mindful of the, the tax burden. And then I really like the idea that we're seeding a capital reserve fund that's available to all of the schools. It's smart to start that, because ultimately, if we have some sort of crisis, that will ultimately fall back on the taxpayers as well, if we don't have a capital reserve fund to cover said crisis, whether it's a failed roof or any other, large project. So, this is a win-win in both ways. That some goes back now, but it's also preventing pain down the line as well, which also falls on the shoulders of our, hardworking taxpayers in the community. So that's where I'm fine, Morgan, if we want to kind of get that number below the 5 and kind of make it an even split with that 605, I think you said.
So I realize I'm sharing the spreadsheet behind the curtain, and I'm quickly looking to make sure that none of my sarcastic comments are on screen, but I don't think that they are. I apologize if they are.
You look
but
like you're
if
in the
you've got-
clear.
Good. The 605, which was 500 in that print version, that goes up to 605. Your increase in ed spend per pupil is down to 4.9%. And then you can see after the CLA, the impacts to Bakersfield. It's now a drop of almost 5 cents, a little over a penny for Berkshire, a little over 2 cents for Montgomery, and almost 8 cents for Sheldon. So not a huge move, but every penny counts.
And Morgan, as in past years, the biggest drivers on the budget increases their salaries and health insurance, correct?
Yeah, salaries, health insurance. We've got a couple of additional positions in this budget, but I was looking overall and budget to budget, there's only an additional 2.0 FTE. And we can kind of chase through if you want who's cutting and who's adding. The one big difference, I guess, would be the district-wide facilities person who's gone, and then we've hired Vern at the SU level, and so the assessment's gone up for that. The big movement, I think, is really around special ed, or the big uncertainty is still around special ed. And I can go back to your version of that and take you up into these categories. Somewhere where I can see it. Seems to not want to go back to the PDF. Okay, I think you got it now. So, yeah, there's increases here and there. You'll see the big drop in special ed. Sort of big increase in terms of the rest of the SU. Transportation as well. This one is largely food service, and then bringing Vern at least partway into the SU budget. See, the reason that there's a decrease there is taking that position out of the NMV budget. The big increase in direct instruction we kind of talked about. See a little bit of a decrease in tuition, which I hope holds up. We talked last month around the additional teacher and para for pre-K in Sheldon, assuming that we can find a space to house them. I think that's the big driver for your pre-K increase, and also getting a little more accurate in terms of where we are budgeting for some of those paraeducators. And then again, moving your special ed paraeducators up to direct instruction. So if it's useful, we could do line by line. I did send you the staffing report sort of at the last minute before your meeting. I think the only material changes were some corrections that Lenny sent in, added back an NCSS worker, taken out most of a paraeducator, and then added back a to be hired person that's been kind of in the budget and unfulfilled or unfilled the last couple of years.
Morgan, I don't know that we need to go through line by line. I mean, like maybe we could kind of handle it the way we did with the SU budget, more kind of the big sections. I'm mindful of the time, and that seemed to be a good encapsulation the way we handled it at the SU level going through the budget.
Okay.
And if there's anyone who feels differently, by all means, of course, speak up. And if you want to go through line by line, we can do that.
And what I'll do is I'll bring up the line by line bit and you can slow me down, but I will try to hammer through this as quickly as I can.
Morgan, can I just interrupt you with an update on the bill for town meeting?
Absolutely.
It sounds like the House Government Operations Committee will be passing out the same language that the Senate did later this week. So we should have the option for remote meeting if that's what people wanted, but you will probably have to wait until the end of this week, beginning of next week, for that to become a reality.
Yeah, I think if we could get that by the 12th, then we would look pretty smart for warning a meeting on the 17th.
I think you probably should. Today is only the 5th, right? I think that,
Yeah.
I think it'll probably happen.
Yeah. So you think they'll pass it out? They'll pass it by Friday?
I do. That's what I'm being told, that it doesn't look like there are going to be any big roadblocks to passing it by the end of the week with the same language that the Senate has used.
Okay.
The only thing to think about is there will be no funding provided. You know how last year we had CRF money that was used to help with the mailings and maybe some other additional costs.
Yep.
There will be no funding associated with this bill. It'll just be an option for towns, any municipality, towns or school districts or water districts or whoever, to vote to decide to use the remote format for their annual meeting this year, and this year only.
Yep. And I will say, in terms of additional costs, we really didn't have any last year because we put out the same number of mailers and because both NMV and ER vote board members and budgets Australian ballot anyway. There wasn't any additional cost to move those other articles to Australian ballot. It was just a bigger piece of paper for folks to deal with. It would be a cost, and I think I mentioned this in the email that I sent out, if they end up giving the option of just postponing the meeting, because we still have to do budget by Australian ballot, even if they say you can do it in June.
So yes, there will be an option to move the date. I neglected to mention that. And I don't know exactly how far into the future that option will exist. I haven't read the bill that carefully, but that was mentioned to me that that's one of the provisions of the bill.
Yep. Yeah, so that one would cost money. So up on your screen now, hopefully, is the beginning of the big budget document that I'd sent earlier today. This is a 26-pager. I will blow through this quickly, and I will really just focus on staff and number of staff. So in Bakersfield, I believe budget to budget that there's a fractional drop, so less than a half-person drop in terms of FTE. The pre-K section is pretty much the same in terms of staffing. You've got one teacher and one para.
Morgan, do you have the right document up?
I think it's, you still have the spreadsheet up, Morgan.
Oh, okay. Let me try again.
Thanks.
Sound different? Smaller numbers?
Yes, that's the one you're looking for, I believe.
Okay. So wiggling around. All right, perfect. So, and I should say, Rhoda, and then the other principals, when we get to those sections, feel free to jump in and correct me when I make mistakes. Start out with Bakersfield, the pre-K section, no change in terms of staffing. You've got one teacher and one paraeducator assigned to pre-K. You get down to the direct instruction section. We've got an increase in paras by 2, but a decrease in teaching staff in this section by 2. So no net change in terms of people overall.
Is that a change to programs or just staffing?
Rhoda can jump in. I believe there's no significant program changes.
Correct. There's no.
Okay.
Page 3 goes into guidance and health. This is where that 0.2 drop is in guidance because we had budgeted for a full-time guidance counselor and the person that we hired wanted 4 days a week. So we've just kind of truing up the budget to reality there. 1.0 nurse, the nursing in Montgomery and in Bakersfield is now not split between multiple people, but still a 1.0 person there. Page 4 gets you to library, still a half-time person there who's also half-time as an instructional person up above. Still a half-time technology support person shared with Montgomery. One principal and one admin assistant, and 1.5 custodians in the plant section. I will give you a tip for next year's budget that we are so thankful to have Vern as a SU-wide facilities person. He is definitely going to encourage some different way of looking at some of these budgets, and so building in more into your budget for ongoing maintenance. And also he's a strong believer that we need 2 full-time custodians for our tiny schools, where we've kind of cobbled it together with 1.5. But no change this year to people in terms of Bakersfield custodians. Got a bunch of the small sections of the budget for field trips and extracurricular activities if we get to a place where we can do that again. A tiny amount of money for summer school, as I think I pointed out last meeting, just primarily because we need to change the way that we're reporting that. Special ed is kind of disappearing from your budget with Act 173. If that changes, in May or April or May, you might see some kind of radically different budgets when you start seeing your monthly reports coming July and August. Athletics, some money in there. Again, those activities have been a little bit truncated with COVID. And then some money for non-athletic co-curricular activities. So that's kind of the speed walkthrough of Bakersfield. Berkshire, again, overall, just a fraction, a 0.1 decrease in terms of FTEs. In their pre-K, it looks like an increased budget to budget for paras, and that's primarily us being more accurate and pulling paras out of other parts of the budget. But they have a 1.0 paraeducator. They have a 1.0 teacher in their program. It's billed back from the SU because she also provides special ed services to those pre-K kiddos, and so she's required to be paid out of the SU. The special ed portion of her salary is coming to you through the assessment, so it's maybe a little bit artificially lower in Berkshire in terms of what's carried by the local budget. In terms of direct instruction, there's really no change in terms of teacher people, and there's a drop of 1.5 in terms of paraeducators. Coming down here, still 4 employees from NCSS budgeted. So in terms of FTE, no change. And then I believe we've got 1 person billed back right now from the SU, and this is an interventionist position that in many years past was in your budget and unfilled. I've got them coming through as a purchase service from the SU because if we hire this person, it's likely that we would be able to use CFP to offset some of this salary. And so they probably wouldn't be a direct hire. In terms of guidance for Berkshire, no change. You've got a full-time guidance counselor. You've got a full-time nurse. You've got 0.7 librarian, no change there. You've got a 0.5 tech support person. We had called her 1.0 in the budget, but really this is more accurately reflecting the amount of time that she's spending. In terms of office of the principal, kind of 1 principal, 1 admin assistant, and then in getting into custodian, you've got no change with 2.0, 2 full-time custodians in that building. Page 11, page 12 is very similar to Bakersfield and the other schools in terms of some small amounts of money for field trips, moving that special ed up to direct instruction, and then money for athletics, co-curricular, and some transportation. That brings us to Montgomery, top of page 13. A 0.3 increase in terms of FTE, and there's a lot of kind of moving pieces and parts, so it'll be tough to suss it out exactly, but we'll walk through it. In terms of pre-K, you had purchased from the SU, kind of bought back your early ed teacher who also had a special ed endorsement. As of this year, Montgomery has a full-time teacher who's just early ed, and we've sort of better captured in terms of the budget what kind of paraeducator support was there, whereas in the past they were sort of lost in the direct instruction. In terms of teachers, we've got a budget to budget halftime increase, and that's somebody that we had hired this year, and then a 1.8 decrease in terms of paraeducators. And that's, I think, and Sandy can correct me, largely driven by needs, and then also by moving some of those paraeducators up into that pre-K budget where they should have been all along. In terms of guidance, we had budgeted 0.4 direct hire. You are sharing a guidance counselor with Richford. So that's coming through this year as a purchase service. And as I think we talked about last month, Sandy had proposed moving that up to full-time. That likely would be a direct hire, but because the person you have is a purchase service, it was easier for me to plunk them in there. But that would be a budget to budget 0.6 increase in terms of the number of humans. No change in health. No change in library, again, except that it's a purchase service, because that's another brokered contract with Richford Elementary where you're sharing a full-time person with them. Half-time technology person still, that's shared with Bakersfield. Again, one principal, one admin in the principal's office. Still at 1.5 custodians in Montgomery. And I suspect Vern's going to be trying to convince Sandy and you to bump that up to 2.0 for next year for FY24. And again, field trips, special ed going away, summer school coming in, a little bit of money for athletics, a little bit of money for co-curricular. That brings us to Sheldon on page 18. People to people, there's a 3 FTE increase. Primarily that's around here in that pre-K budget. So we are talking about adding a pre-K teacher and a pre-K para so that we can get a second pre-K room in that building. Again, if we can find space. I think we covered that at the last meeting. You know, Christina and Lynn and I can talk about the need there if we didn't. But moving through there, there's no real increase in terms of teachers other than we moved one from the technology section up to the direct instruction section because he's actually spending quite a bit of his time in front of students rather than just doing tech support. An increase of 2 paras, but a decrease in 1 NCSS worker. So overall, it's just a 1.0 increase there. And that's the additional person that I mentioned up top. No change to guidance with 2 people, no change to health with 1 nurse. Again, that instructional, library, same. We get down to technology here. There's $2,400, which is some summer hours for the tech person to sort of do catch up on updating iPads and things like that. No change in the principal's office, 1 principal, 2 admins there. No change in custodians. They have 3 full-timers in Sheldon. And then again, some transportation for athletics and co-curricular, some budget for athletics, co-curricular, special ed paras being moved to the district level. And then that brings you to the district-wide section of the budget. This is largely tuition, so we're budgeting 41,000 for pre-K tuition. That's a guess at this point, and that's something that you're obligated to pay if there are parents who want to access that. Your regular ed tuition, public high school at 4.2 million, 126,000 for Vermont private tuition, 53,000 for out-of-state public private tuition for high schoolers, and then almost 700,000 for tuition to tech centers. Those numbers, again, could tweak a little bit between now and January 17th, but they shouldn't move materially. Board of Ed and legal is kind of largely the same. Insurance goes up every year. We hopefully have enough for legal in here. We're seeing a lot, especially at the SU around that. And then the SU assessments, which in this section is largely the increase is SU board can tell you is at this point largely food service, and then moving that facilities person into the SU budget. And then this is where there's a big drop for your district. So we had budgeted 91,000 when it was a local hire. That's dropped down to 0 as a SU-wide hire. And that brings you to your 18,210,899 figure. So too fast, too slow, just right. Any questions?
No, it looks good, Morgan. It was really clear and helpful to go through, sure. I mean, I know there's still a lot of, some of these uncertainties. But given those uncertainties, it seems like we've got the kind of comfortable buffers where they need to be and such.
Okay. And then while you're all looking for your unmute button for your hard questions, I'll toss up the latest of the pie charts, which you've seen before. This is just showing your budget by program. So this green bar is really what we call regular ed, which is 90% of your budget, 95% of your budget. Little slice for special ed, that blue one. After school program is a little red one. This is maybe a little more useful, a diagram at the SU level than at the district level. But the second one I think is more informative to voters if they want to linger with it. And what this hopefully says to them that this blue section, half of your budget is people that you hire directly. If you look at your tuition section, so that biggest red piece of the pie, the other service, the second big red piece of the pie, and then your contracted services, which is the one closest to the blue. Those three really are largely driven by other people's people. So your tuition rates to high schools, and you're paying for SU staff, and you're paying for NCSS staff. And this yellow wedge up top is really your light bill, your pencils, your stuff. And so that's a pretty minor fraction of a budget these days. And then I will switch tabs again. And are you seeing the mailer now? This you'll have in your packet, and I won't spend any time tonight. If you see spelling errors or you have suggestions on how to make it clearer, the one side of that mailer would be showing that per pupil ed spending for this year, and showing NMV and Enosburg Richford below the county average and below the state average. And then you've got on the other side, we'll update this with a warning. So either an informational meeting or an annual meeting for both sides, and then both sides will have updated information on their tax rates. I did also toss in your packets the written update that I put in the budget packet each year. We don't need to go over that tonight, but if you have questions on that or suggestions, I am open to those. Everything that's in yellow is still going to change based on the final budget that you warn.
Morgan, the slide you just showed us, which is the mailer.
Mm-hmm.
When are we printing those, and does it mention the location of the annual meeting? So we want to wait to print until we meet on the 17th?
We will not finalize this until the 17th now. So
Okay.
we will send that out the next day is my assumption, and get that out in the mail as soon as possible.
Okay, and do we send out, obviously I know we mail them, and do we send one out via email to all as well, or just a physical hard copy through the postal service?
So we send this out bulk mail. So this will go to every address within the zip codes that we know we need to target. We have found that there are a few families who get their mail out of Swanton but live in Sheldon, and I think we've tracked them down, and so we actually stamp and sticker one of these for them. And there may be some out of Fairfield as well. Doreen's got a pretty good handle on the folks that we miss. So we send it out that way. It will be in the town books that everybody can access through however they get their town books for town meeting day. We do put it up on our website, and then we do push kind of the robocalls and emails that go through our Power School application. But that's really only going to hit people that have some connection to the school. Either they're an employee or they've got a kid somewhere in the system.
Okay, that sounds good. And Morgan, I assume that we've coordinated with town clerks so that we know when they need the budget for the printing of the town books.
Yep, they all want it earlier than they need it, but if we get it to them the week of the 17th, we should be good.
Okay.
With any luck, this bill will drop by Tuesday, and the Enosburg board will actually finalize their budget Tuesday night, and then I can spend the next 2 days getting their piece done, or my piece of their piece done, and then I can focus the 18th and 19th just on yours.
Okay, and you're not concerned that we're pushing it too late in setting that 17th as our special meeting?
I'm absolutely concerned, but I don't know that it makes sense to go earlier at this point. If people want to say that they're available Friday or Thursday, we could kind of hold that in our pocket. And if this thing moves quicker than we're thinking, we could do it that date. And maybe we'll take that up at under board business.
Well, and I mean, we could also revisit, I mean, we can decouple. No, the warning, sorry. No, we can't decouple the location question from the warning. Okay.
Right.
I just want to make sure we're not, missing a, window of time to kind of get people, the mailers out and town clerks, the materials that they need and so on and so forth.
I think we will be okay. And, they're all also running into this because their select boards are going to be meeting in the next 2 weeks and trying to figure out how they're going to do their meetings as well.
Right. Okay. Of course. And And
If you
so,
radically change the budget on the 17th, you'll make me sort of sad. But if we're just setting the meeting, then, we'll make it work.
okay. And what about the end of next week? I mean, would that be a little more comfortable of a time frame rather than pushing it into that following week? And what about, I know we have an SU, I'm not looking at my calendar, but we have an SU meeting. That Wednesday is the 16th, what's that Wednesday? We have an SU meeting.
I think, is that the 19th or the 26th? Must be the 19th.
So, okay, hang on. I'm just looking at my calendar here. We've got right, the 19th. But so, I mean, what about if we met on the Thursday, the 13th, or the Friday? No, the Friday maybe. Is that any consequential difference as far as your time frame to then get up materials kind of rolling?
It would be great. We just won't know if the bill has been signed into law yet.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, I guess we'll just keep it on the 17th then and hope that things progress quickly and we have all the information we need in order to make an informed, legally appropriate decision.
So are you going to ask them to approve the budget, but not the warning tonight, Morgan?
I won't ask them to approve the budget yet in terms of an official approval, but I would love to know what number you want for the capital reserve fund, whether or not you want to include that other article, looking at future capital reserve funds and any other, budget changes that you want to propose. It would be great if after, I revisit this tomorrow, that this budget is put to bed unless we get some material changes on tuition rates or SU revenue that allows me to drop those assessments.
Well, it sounded as though we landed, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, we landed in a good place with how we were going to allocate the surplus amount that had us at that 4.90%, that
Yep.
amount for the capital fund. So then I think the remaining, I mean, and no one is voicing that I've heard yet any major red flags about the overall budget. That looks like we're mostly feeling fine with that. And then we have now this question of that particular article on the warning and whether we want to include that or not. Right, Morgan? That's kind of the last kind of decision making that we need to do, eh?
Yep. So what we do is this article would become 605,000. And then this Article 6 is the one that there's the question about just philosophically if you want to have this in there so that you guys, when you're setting the budget, are deciding how much goes to a capital reserve fund, or if you want to continue to leave this up to your voters.
So if we adopt Article 6, is that what you're saying then, that like the following year, then we wouldn't be?
Right, if
like
you adopt
wanting-
Article 6 and the voters approve that article, and they could vote it down. But if you warn it and they vote it, then instead of next year you going back and saying, can we put $500,000 into the capital reserve fund, you as a board are going to say, we're putting $500,000 of that in the capital reserve fund. You're going to probably do that on June 30th of this year. And then anything else is going to go back to them.
But so then do we run the risk of, if they approve it this year, but then don't approve the Article 6 next year, then we'd be even more, I don't know if I'm following it right, but
Yeah, I don't think there's a downside to putting it out there for that reason, because if they vote it down, you still get to go and ask them for a specific dollar amount once we know, how much money is left over. I think the only risk is, is it gonna feel like a reach to your voters, and then are they gonna come out mad and vote down other articles? And then I think it's kind of where, as a board, where are you philosophically with that? Is it better to leave that power with the voters, or is it better to go into a budget vote more confidently about, where your tax rates are likely to end up? Or be more confident that you're going to be able to fill that capital reserve fund in future years?
And Morgan, you said that the Enosburg Richford Board is putting this Article 6 on their warning as well?
They put it in last year and it was passed last year. So in theory, they would have been able to say, we're going to put X dollars amount and not return any more to the taxpayers. They didn't really have any left over. So it was a bit of a moot point for them this year. And I haven't had the conversation with them about whether they want to do it again. It is pretty low on my care list about whether we have it or not. I think I'd heard that there were some districts that were doing that, and so I brought it forward last year to both boards. And I can make arguments for and against, and it's not going to bother me one way or the other if we put it in or take it out.
So in effect, it's like giving 2 pops of money potentially, because it's Article 5 is approving like the prior.
It's voting on 2 different pots of money. So they could vote down Article 5 and say, we want everything back this year, give you authority on Article 6 and say, but next year, take whatever you want. It's highly unlikely that they'll do that. And, for the most part, probably either they both go up or they both go down. But the Article 5 is specific to the money that was left over last June, and Article 6 would be specific to the money that's left over this coming June.
Right. So it's like in the same year, like you'd be getting money from last year and this year. And so if you put all the money from this year in it this year, next year, there would be like no money potentially to buy the tax rate down.
Next year would be up to you guys solely. So if we're having the same conversation and the number next year is $500,000 left over, instead of you deciding what you're going to ask the voters to put in the capital reserve fund, you as a board are going to say, let's put this much in a capital reserve fund and put this much back to the voters. And the voters don't really get a say in it at that point. They've given you the authority to, basically approve the 605 that you're asking them to approve.
And how come, Morgan, we don't, do we have a way of letting taxpayers know what we are also at the same simultaneously returning to the taxpayers?
You do. That's in that use of fund balance line in your budget.
Okay. And taxpayers will see that and
taxpayers can see that. And, this year I will certainly highlight it because it's a big number, whether they do or not, or whether they care. I think people are generally looking at the bottom line and they're looking at their tax rate.
Of course. I could go either way on the Article 6. I feel like I can make a good argument on either side. I really appreciate, that this is not our money. And it's a tremendous kind of responsibility to be wise in how we spend it. And then I also think that we are elected by people in our communities who are entrusting us to be judicious and thoughtful in how we use taxpayer resources. So and to be, good stewards of the money. And I think we tend to do that and live up to that pretty awesome responsibility. So I could go either. I'm really fine either way. I don't know if anyone has a strong feeling in one way or the other.
I feel like I just don't understand at this hour of the night, but what I'm seeing is I don't like Article 6 because it's like you don't know what you're approving, right? Because you don't know what that figure is. So it's kind of like, I don't know. There's like no transparency at that point.
Well, except that in a way, it's no different than the discussion we just had now, right? I mean, we all kind of parsed through this evening, the discussion around the 605, where we landed with that 605 figure.
But this is saying we'd put all of it, right? So in
No, it's not. It's not saying that you'd put all of it. It's saying that you get to make the decision without going
Okay.
back to the voters. So it's yeah, I'm with Mary. I can argue either way. I worry that people will get confused by it. But what it's saying is that you as a board is going to go through this same discussion. And if you land on 605, if Article 6 had been passed, you're just going to make the 605 happen and you're not going to ask for permission from the voters to do that. Whereas the process now is you guys have this conversation and go to the voters and you say, we think 605 is the right number. What do you think?
So I think part of my concern is the distrust we have of government now, that taking that vote away from them might feel like the same thing. We're taking away their voice. I also question if there's some way to make known to them in the pamphlet that this is a half and half split, that half is going back and half is going, so that they can see with it, because a lot of people aren't going to look through the budget line by line.
Right.
I agree.
I can certainly highlight that in my my budget report. I don't know how many people actually read that. But I do try to keep it as short as possible so that if people do wander into that, I can, make sure that that's the piece that jumps out.
Well, it sounds as though it's raising enough red flags for people that omitting it, at least for now, for this cycle of voting, may be the better path. I mean, I can appreciate why. I mean, historically, back in the day in Montgomery, that was always kind of an important part of kind of community participation, being able to allocate what we, have a voice in what we were allocating toward our capital fund. And I see what, Arlene is saying for sure, and Kat's concerns. So, and I think strong arguments could be made on either side. So I'm fine either. I'm really fine either way. But it seems like it's raising a lot of confusion and kind of doesn't land super comfortably with people.
I'm happy to take it out and we will go on from there.
All right.
Yeah, I
Sounds
would
good.
agree with Mary. That was well said, Mary. Thanks.
Great. Okay. So just to kind of wrap up, I know everyone's probably kind of feeling a bit tired. We figured out the articles on the warning. The budget generally looks good. We are going to wait. We're going to have a special meeting on Monday, the 17th, after this legislation we think passes and is signed by the governor, and we will make a final decision then as to the format of the annual meeting and finalize the warning with those exact numbers that we went over tonight. Am I missing anything, Morgan, that we still need to tend to budget wise?
Don't think so. I think that is everything. And the only other thing that I'd put out there is that if this meeting is in person, I believe the rotation is still that we would be at Sheldon.
Oh, okay. Right, the last one was at Montgomery, and the one before that was at Berkshire, and then we missed last year. And right, we're on
Right,
we're on Sheldon. Okay.
The first one was in Bakersfield when there was only 2 towns.
Oh, well, right, yes, I was still with just Montgomery back then. Okay.
Mary, the only thing that we're missing from my perspective is a time for the 17th, so I can get it on the special meeting warning. We want to do our normal 6:30 time.
Yeah, let's do 6:30 and give people that time to get home from work and transition with family and such.
I have it in the notes.
Great. All right.
And there are those 2 motions that I still need. And I will get where I can read them to you. And this is to announce your elementary tuition rate and your secondary tuition rate. And so if there was a town that tuitioned all its kids and they wanted to send you a 4th grader or an 8th grader, we would charge them one of these 2 rates. And the reason that we're doing it is I have to have that rate announced to the state by the 15th.
Okay.
And so it would be looking for a motion to announce an FY23 elementary tuition rate of $16,455.
All right. I'll make the motion to announce elementary school rate of $16,455.
16,555.
555, not 455. Sorry. All right. Do you need so 16,555 as our elementary tuition rate? By roll, Miranda,
Yes.
Emily,
Yes.
Lisa,
Yes.
Kat,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Arlene,
Yes,
and Mary is a yes.
And then a motion to announce an FY23 secondary tuition rate of 16,555.
Okay, I'll
that
make,
motion.
okay, thank you, Kat. By roll, Emily,
Yes.
Lisa,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Miranda,
Yes.
Kat,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Arlene,
yes,
and Mary is a yes. Anything else, Morgan, or is that the last? Those were the only two motions that you needed right
Those are the
now.
only 2 things I needed. What I will do is I will check with your town clerks tomorrow just to make sure that we're not, that the 17th isn't too late for them. And we'll probably check in with the lawyers as well, just to make sure that we've got the timing right. And if we don't, we might be back with warning something for the 13th or the 14th if those few days are going to matter.
Okay, that sounds good. All right,
all I have.
Lynn, thanks, Morgan, I appreciate it. That's a lot of work with that budget. Thank you so much. All right, Lynn, you're up.
I think I can be relatively quick tonight. Your personnel report in your board packet has not changed at all. There isn't anything that is actionable in that packet. So you've had a couple of resignations, support staff, so there's no need to approve. In Berkshire, a paraeducator, Caitlin Gleason, and a bus monitor, Kimberly Morapino. And you have some open positions, those also have not changed. I do like to just say those out loud in case anyone is listening and is interested in working for us. So we still have paraeducator positions open in Bakersfield, Berkshire, Sheldon, an academic coach position in Berkshire, a behavior tech position in Berkshire, a behavior tech position in Sheldon, and a long-term elementary teacher in Sheldon. Attached to your board report or your board agenda was the salary advancement report that Jamie put together for you. So you should all have had that available to you in the email that Doreen sent. I will have something I need to talk through with you under student, but I would like to do that in executive session. So if we could hold that until the end, Mary, given the hour, we can release people from the meeting.
Certainly. Yeah.
So I'm going to talk what I think is briefly just about our current reality with COVID. The last handful of days have been pretty challenging, some of the most challenging so far. There was a surprise announcement in terms of the changing timeline for close contact and positive individuals for quarantine and isolation that came out of the CDC the 29th. And we've had kind of some changing guideposts since then from the Vermont Department of Health and the CDC. So I chose to delay our implementation of that by a day because it was very uncertain whether or not where that guidance was going to formally land. There was a change on the 3rd on Monday, and then there was another change yesterday. So it has changed already again since I communicated last time. So it's feeling a little frustrating because we're having to implement these changes before we know any of the details of how to apply the change. So we're doing the best we can. I think that one of the things I met with the leaders and principals today, and I've also met with other superintendents, and we've all equated it to we're at 30,000 feet and we are building the plane and we're flying it and people are on board, and it's the reality we're in right now. So we're trying to navigate the logistics of these changes, and we understand that people are frustrated, and we're definitely feeling that frustration from people. We're doing our best to figure it out because these changes, although they might not feel like a big deal to people, they completely change how we operate in terms of what does that now do to our pediatric algorithm, and what does that now do, and how does that apply to our test to stay protocol. And there's also some big changes that have happened in terms of how fully vaccinated is defined. So people who are vaccinated but not boosted now have to follow the unvaccinated guidelines, and that came out as a surprise to people. So there are some unhappy folks out there as a result of that. There also has been age categories that were approved for booster, and so now those people who are just approved for booster, we're having to navigate at what point do they actually get considered, or do they have to follow the unvaccinated guidelines because they really haven't even had the opportunity yet to get the booster, even though their age band has been approved. So as you can imagine, I won't go much deeper than that other than to say it's complicated. We're waiting for some more information from the Vermont Department of Health, and we hope that will make it simpler for all of us to be able to navigate this. But again, I just ask for patience. Our nurses and our leaders are getting the brunt of some really angry calls from folks that they're having to communicate information to. So I just, I ask, we're all kind of in this together, and none of us wants to be in this situation. We're going to do the best we can. We have from the start, and we'll continue to do that. The patience part is something that we're really hoping people can dig deep and try to find some patience and understanding that it is not the principals and it is not the nurses. They're really doing the best they can to figure it out as we go. Our reality around COVID as of the start of this meeting, we've hit 349 cases since the start of the school year. We've had 59 cases that we can account for so far that occurred either during the break or both during the break and up to this point this week. So that's our total so far. So it continues to be the priority to protect the in-person learning environment, and I'll be transparent. That's getting harder and harder to do, especially with the change in terms of how we define vaccinated but not boosted individuals, and that change to the guidance. has actually made it so that more of our staff who aren't fully boosted yet have to quarantine and aren't eligible for anything like test to stay yet. So it's complicated, and we've got some schools that are really in danger of not having adequate staffing levels to safely operate. So I would say that right now, our operational levels in our schools are tentative at best, and we're kind of in a critical place in several spots. So we're trying to keep our eye on that the best we can. We're seeing pretty significant attendance issues in some of our schools for our students, and we're seeing obviously attendance issues for staff because so many are out either sick with COVID or have a child who is out, or they've been a close contact. There's lots of reasons. So we're just seeing compounding effect right now. It seems to be growing pretty quickly. We're doing our best to, be as consistent as we can in terms of masking and following other mitigation measures in the school. I think that, we're always hopeful that that will have an impact and prevent the spread in our schools. I think that there's a lot of spread happening in a lot of places. And I think that's just our reality right now. It's out in our communities and people are being exposed to it in a variety of places. So that's our reality. Anybody have any questions about COVID?
Have there been any more students who have requested to go to the virtual academy? Like
Gab,
just
I'm
this latest
give that-
wave of,
I have not spoken to Gab this week, so I don't know. I'm going to give that to her. I think she's on the call.
On the regular, people are requesting information. As far as people coming in and out, it's spotty. Yeah, yes and no is my answer. There's interest and then sometimes not follow through. So there's a lot of people, I think, living in this unpredictable world that we are all living in and really struggling with what should they do and how long should they wait. And so
we're still we're going to keep doing the best we can. This has been a learning curve for all of us across the world, not just here. And we'll navigate what is ahead. We'll do it together, and we'll get through it. There will be another side. It's hard to see right now, but we've got to maintain that hope that we are heading for a more normal reality ahead. I think we're all just kind of at that place where we're hoping it's sooner rather than later. But unfortunately, I think the next couple of months it's not going to be that for us. I think the next couple of months are going to be rough. So we already talked about this a little bit. The legislative session began on the 4th. So yesterday, Lisa, I think you had your first day back. Well, you might have had some pre-work that you were doing there, but legislative session in general began yesterday. I sent you all a link, just legislator contact information and the committee assignments for those legislators as things come up throughout the session. I think it's helpful for both boards and leaders to have access to that. So just as an example, what Morgan and Lisa were talking about today, the speed in which some of the bills can go through the legislature can be pretty quick. And I know there are times Lisa's very good about reaching out and saying, what do you think about this or about that? And there are other legislators that would love to hear from constituents as well. So you now have all of the contact information. And if you start to see something bubble up and you want to weigh in as an individual, you can't weigh in as a board because you're only a board when you're all together. But if you want to weigh in individually, please reach out. One of the things that I always like to tell people, especially new ones, Arlene, new board members, is that the VSBA is an excellent resource for board members, and you'll be getting regular legislative updates from the Vermont School Boards Association. So those are really worth taking the time to sit down and read. They're usually somewhere around 10 pages, and they do a really good job of breaking down all of the education related important legislation that is happening currently. So I've just given you all of that so you can, like, now that they're back in session, here we go. Things start to move along. So reach out if there are any questions that you have for myself or for Morgan. If you have questions about it, and you also can use VSBA as a resource, you can reach out. I often will encourage Mary to do that when we're talking through some of the challenging board related topics, and they're a really good tool. That's all I have other than the student executive session, Mary.
Great, thanks, Lynn, I appreciate it. So we have our principal reports up. Rhoda, do you have anything that you would like to add or highlight from your board report?
I don't think so. I think we're good. Is there anyone who has any questions?
No. I was glad to see.
Go
I was
ahead.
glad to see you mention that Vern came and did a walkthrough. It seems as though he's really, Sandy, I think it was Sandy also mentioned he's been at Montgomery. It sounds like he's making the rounds and getting a real sense of what needs to get tended to in building level.
I will say on that, I know Aaron and I have had a lot of conversations about the parking lot here in Bakersfield. And just saying, Vern's concerned about that too. So I think he's going to work on moving to get that finished.
Great. That's great. All right. Lenny, do you have anything that you'd like to add to or highlight from your board report?
Related to the lead in schools, we actually had Vern he's been a great asset in a lot of ways for a lot of us, but he went to work with my custodian on getting all of our classroom, all of our class. We did a few different things over winter break to get almost all of our faucets and fixtures up and running so that they can be tested again. And then after they're tested, then hopefully we can have them back up and running to use in our different spaces. So there's about 14 tests. We ended up getting rid of all of our fountains in our classrooms. There's a couple different reasons why Vern recommended that. There's some other health concerns around that, along with the concern with lead, and it's a little bit more cost effective. We still have the water office cooler style setup in all the classes, so they can access clean water in their classrooms. But we are hoping to get those results. First, we need to get the test, and then we hope to get those results soon. Then we'll be back up to running with, hopefully we don't have to do anything more beyond just update the fixtures.
Great, good. Well, good. I'm glad to hear that he's helping with that, and sounds like that's a good strategy. All right, Sandy, do you have anything that you would like to add to or highlight from your board report?
I just have a little update with the Junk to Funk, the artist in residence that we have coming on the week of January 31st. The PTO has always said they wanted to do something fun for the kids. And when I told them about this Junk to Funk, they took a look at it, and we were going to split the cost or something like that. And all of a sudden they emailed me and said they want to pay for it. So it was really nice. And then this person comes from New Hampshire, and we have to pay his mileage and so forth, which adds up quite a bit. And Amanda Starr Photography notified me and said she'd like to pay for that. So she wrote a check for $500 to cover his expenses. So super nice that jumped in to pay for it.
Wow, that's amazing. That's a real wonderful show of support from a lot of different parts of the community. Nice. Looks like such a fun program.
We're looking forward to it.
Will you videotape some of it, Sandy?
Oh, I'm sure. We'll get Marty on that. Either videotape it or live stream it or something.
Yeah, that'd be really nice to be able to see. Great. Thanks so much, Sandy. Christy, do you have anything that you would like to add to or highlight from your board report? I know you did send the space assessment document. I'm wondering, given the late hour, and since I think that's a little more of kind of might need a deeper dive, if maybe we'll punt that to our February meeting to look more closely at the space, specifically at the space assessments.
That makes sense. Because I did finish it, but I didn't necessarily do a real analysis of that data.
Okay.
It took a while to kind of wrap my head around how I was even going to do it or present it. Morgan actually shared something that Beth O'Brien had used. So I used part of her idea for presenting that. So yeah, that'd be great.
All right. Yeah, maybe we can do it as, you know, if we have another highlight, we could have two spotlights that week, and we'll make sure we carve out enough time to look at it. And that sounds like it gives you a little more grace to kind of flesh it out a bit.
Yeah.
Great.
Has Vern worked with you on that yet?
No, I showed him, he was here Monday, I think. Yeah, he was here Monday, and so I showed him that it was not complete, but I showed it to him, and we were going to circle back and look at it too.
Good. Good.
All right. Anything else though, Christy, that you wanted to highlight or add to?
No, I think that, the addition of Vern has been very helpful. He has been here a lot. I think he's been in all of our buildings quite a bit. And we just changed out the lights in our gym to energy efficient ones. They're $140 each with a $100 rebate for each one.
Wow.
So that's only being $40 per light. And we changed those out, and I will tell you the gym is brightly lit right now. It's never been so bright in there. We actually probably don't need all the lights on all the time, but so that was a good project to get done. We had to bring in a lift to do it, so it was nice to chalk that one up. But he's got a lot of things going on here, a lot of smaller projects too.
Great. That's good to hear. All right. So then we're moving on to our board business. We've kind of set at least the most pressing future agenda items for our special meeting on the 17th, potentially sooner if Morgan finds out that we need to push it forward. I wanted to make a really quick mention of the Rewild Vermont tree donation project. I think, and this is mostly geared toward the principals, because I think that each of you would be the one to kind of within your school community to kind of connect with them and spearhead the project if it were to pique your interest. And let me know if I'm repeating something you've already heard about, but I had a woman named Kate Gannon reach out to me. She's an intern with the 350 Vermont project. And this is they have funding for supplying trees and volunteers to plant the trees. And they're trying to help communities organize kind of caring for little mini orchards. And it can be as little as one tree or a mini orchard, as she suggests, really whatever makes sense for the school and for for you all as the principals who would be kind of coordinating this. I'm going to forward her contact information to each of you. Seems like a great project. I had a really nice conversation with her. She's incredibly kind and very knowledgeable in this realm. They're really wanting to kind of help address food insecurity in the communities, connect, kids and with the food supply, and address climate change with kind of carbon sequestration that trees can contribute, aid in that way. So it's a great program, and they have all this funding to pretty much, everything would be covered. If any of you want, I'll pass on her contact information and let each of you kind of reach out to her if that inspires you to do something. I know some of the schools already have garden plots, and it could be a really nice thing to integrate into your existing gardening programs. And again, it could be as little, as one apple tree, or a little grove of plums or something like that. I loved the idea, and she's really kind, so she'd be a nice person to work with for sure. So I'll forward that to all four of you. And I think that the ER board is doing the same for their building principals as well. And I also am going to pass it on to our select board chair, because they're interested in doing it in towns as well as at the schools. So, so look out for that email in the next day or so from me with her contact info and some details about the program. Let's see, our SU board representative report. Emily or Kat, do you all want to share anything, or I'm happy to do it? I did make a few notes to refresh my memory on the last meeting.
I'm totally drawing a blank. My apologies.
No worries. I can make some highlights here. Well, one thing that happened that was we renewed Lynn's pandemic response kind of decision-making authority, which we had sunsetted before the break, and we did renew that through April. So she'll continue in that role through April. We discussed, as we have in these local district meetings, some of the implications of Act 173, the waiting study. We had spotlights from Dominic and about some of the new tech work that's going on, and he has now an assistant that's really helping with some of the heavy lifting around some of the tech tech needs that are pretty comprehensive throughout the schools. Heather Moore did a great update on the LEAPS program. I mean, she's just extraordinary what she does. And the program is so excellent. And then Gabby gave an update on the on the Virtual Learning Academy as well, and shared the website and some of the kind of just wonderful things that they're doing in this virtual realm. We set up a subcommittee to work on the superintendent job description, which is woefully outdated. So that's going to be happening in the next month or so. That subcommittee is going to bring that to the SU board. We touched somewhat on the budget. That was actually a big part of the meeting, as it was tonight for us. And then the upcoming negotiations for contracts, and we now have the dates all set in February and in March, where we'll be negotiating with the teachers union on contracts. Lynn and Morgan brought to us a really comprehensive, at least 20 page long document that outlines the ESSER funding and all the kind of dollar amounts and the programs and the specific projects. So that was a pretty comprehensive look at what's happening with that federal ESSER money. And then I think we looked at I think Michelle presented the flyer for the new Monteith House, right? That's at Lynn, that's at the Monteith House, right? Yeah, it's
Yes.
This is the Trail House program for K-5 kids that is going to be kind of a trauma-informed learning environment. It's coming together nicely, and so she shared the flyer with us in a little bit of discussion around what that program will offer in order for us to keep more of our kids in within the SU and having their unique needs met in a trauma-informed environment that has the proper supports and the interventions for them.
I think one key thing to add to that is that, outside supports and interventions that have historically been available to students are no longer. There are incredibly lengthy wait lists, over a year in many places. We have a couple of students who are on wait lists and they're saying it's at least a year. So that is one of the things, just heading into the legislative session, I'll tip that I have asked. My colleagues have asked in the Champlain Valley is that, mental health really needs some time, attention, funding, opportunities. It's a real struggle right now because of, I think resources and labor shortages all the way around.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as Lynn said, it's just a year-long waiting list for families and kids to be able to access some of these services. So the more that we can provide it within the SU, the better, because the need is imminent and great. So that's about it for the board representative report, SU board, that is. So I think at this point, we can let everyone who isn't going to be joining us in executive session go and have a good night's rest. And thank you all so much for all you do.